Okay, good evening to our online viewers and hello to everyone that's here tonight. We're going to hopefully discuss tonight the 10th word of the Risale Nur. Seems that Murat's been summarising the first 9 words of the Risale Nur, otherwise known as the short words. I thought I'd sort of continue along that theme and make a start on the 10th word, which isn't one of the short words, pretty much because it's a long one. It's very long, and we certainly won't get through very much of it tonight at all. But I was hoping to make a start on it at least, up to maybe the second aspect. There are 12 aspects in the first part of the 10th word. Hopefully we'll get through at least 1 or 2 of them. Now the 10th word is primarily concerned with proving the hereafter and the hashir, the resurrection. Okay, so that's what we'll be hopefully trying to begin proving tonight. I'll just get my PowerPoint presentation going. Now this PowerPoint presentation is available on our website, thanks to Arif, who's here tonight, as well as on our forum, as well as on Facebook. So you'll definitely be able to find this presentation to follow if you're watching this live, or even if you're watching this later on, you'll still be able to access this and kind of follow it as you watch this video, hopefully, and that way it might make a little bit more sense. Okay. So, proving resurrection and the hereafter. This will be part 1, and I'll continue with it in coming weeks, inshallah. And it's from the 10th word of the Risale Nur. So, hashir and akhirah, or hashr and akhirah, depending on what language you speak. What are they? So hashir, I've just got here, it's simply resurrection. You know, like this will be familiar to even Christian viewers, Christian readers. They often speak of the resurrection, and so do we, and I think so do most of the major religions of the world, certainly the 3 major monotheistic religions, all have always spoken of this thing called hashir, right? Resurrection, this concept where once you die, that's not the end, okay? You might die in this world, there's no doubt about that, but we can prove that there must be an afterlife, which is the akhirat or the hereafter, okay? So hashir is the resurrection, which is simply you being resurrected on what they call the day of judgment, okay? So that's hashir. It refers to our being raised back to life after our apparent death in the present world. So I've said that apparent death. It's not a death at all. It's just an illusory death. You don't die at all. Your essence, your ruh, your soul, is actually doesn't die. It's still alive, and you'll notice that as soon as you wake up in your grave, I guess. Now, we're resurrected on the day of judgment, where we will all give account of our deeds in this life. Whereas akhirah refers to the afterlife or the hereafter. So what does the hereafter include? It includes the day of judgment, where, you know, like we've all probably heard the stories where, you know, you're handed your book of deeds and, you know, your sins and your good deeds are weighed to see which is heavier and all, and that's all the day of judgment, okay? Yawmiddin from the Quran, Yawmiddin, day of judgment. And then we all know about Jannah or paradise in English, and hell. We've all heard of these, right? Nobody can say they haven't heard of these. These are all part of the afterlife, okay? Which simply means not so much that it's temporally subsequent to this world, because we're not suggesting that it has that kind of temporal relation to this world. In fact, we say it exists right now, you know. But all we mean by the afterlife is that it is other than this life. It is outside of this life, okay? It's not part of this universe. It's kind of, you know, outside of it. So therefore they say the hereafter. But don't get confused and think, you know, like maybe it's something that's yet to be created. It does actually exist now. Okay. So what's so important about this business of resurrection and the day of judgment and all this kind of stuff? Why does it matter so much? Why does Ustad go on about it so much? Okay. So now the Quran, which is the holy book of the Muslims, has 4 major themes. Okay, I won't go into any of them tonight, other than the hereafter. Okay. Now, Hashir is one of the four. Hashir and hereafter are one of the four major themes covered in the Quran. Right. So, if anyone's read Isharat al-Ijaz, you'll know that those four themes are contained in pretty much every ayat of the Quran. Every sentence of the Quran discusses in some way, either directly or indirectly, those four major themes. So it's something that's just kind of spoken of repeatedly in the Quran. So why is this done? Due to its importance. Okay, Ustad says that repetition of need necessitates its repetition, right? Because the need is so great, it needs to be repeated over and over. So that's why the Risale Nur focuses on it, so much. The first 9 words are fairly short. As soon as you get to the 10th word, you realise what's going on here. This is kind of 10 times as long as any of the other.
It's longer than the first 9 words.
It's longer than the first, isn't it? Yeah. So, and that's not the end of it. It's discussed right through the Risale Nur, and it is because it is such an important matter. I've just said here, as Ustad Said Nursi rightly points out, there is no more important matter for human beings than gaining the afterlife. In other words, passing the exam of this world and gaining paradise, right? Like think about what's important in life, like we kind of think that it's important to get married, find the right ring, have children, get a good education, a good job. We all see these things as important, and they are important to an extent. But what if I said to you that you're only going to live in this world for 70 or so years, and then there's another realm, and that goes on for millions and millions of years, or it goes on forever? What if I said that? Suddenly you would see that what seems to you important in this world is actually relatively unimportant from the perspective of an eternal life elsewhere. So that's the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is that this is just a temporary life where we're examined to see where do we need to end up. Okay, as Murat has mentioned in the past, if you, for example, demonstrate that you're someone who wants to learn about Allah, you want to know Allah, then you will be judged in accordance with that, and you will find yourself, inshallah, in a realm where you will infinitely learn about Allah. Okay, that realm being paradise. If you show that in this world that you're not interested in learning about Allah, you're only interested in satisfying your base desires, your animalistic desires, in which case you know better than an animal, although you've been given much higher faculties. You've shown that all you care about is acquiring wealth, exploring your sexuality or whatever. Just kind of base things, building bigger houses, buying more cars. If that's all you care about, then really, similar to the high school student who hasn't studied, what use has he for university? What's the point putting him in, law at Melbourne or medicine at Monash? What's the point? Because he's not interested in studying. He's not prepared to study anyway. If you put him in those courses, he'll just flunk out. So therefore, your education must commence either in a much lower level of paradise, or depending on your sins, in hell, where the education is much more basic and much more focused, where you will only learn about Allah's Jalil names. His names that kind of punishment. Yeah, Qahar, and like you'll see his awesomeness. Yes, but you won't get the opportunity, at least in that realm, to learn about all his other infinite names. So we can understand from all this that yes, Hashir it is important, right? The afterlife, it is an important matter. Okay, so thus proving Hashir and Akhirat, right? Satisfying ourselves that it is real, that it's not just some story in a book or some matter that's raved on about by religionists. Right? Proving to ourselves that it's real, the proof is there. It's your willingness to accept it, right? So accepting that it's real, okay, is a matter of paramount importance. All right. Really, if you've got any intelligence, any time, any energy at all, you should be focusing on that, as well as believing in the other pillars of belief. Okay. So there are 6 pillars of belief in Islam. Some of them are, to believe in Allah, to believe in the angels, to believe in the prophethood of Muhammad, and others are what we're discussing tonight, believing in an afterlife, okay? So these are the pillars of belief, and you must believe in these, because if you don't, it will really impact the extent to which you're able to pass this exam and the extent to which you're able to, fulfill the requirements or fulfill the purposes of your creation. If you don't believe in God, how on earth are you going to commence that journey of beginning to understand who He is and come to love Him and offer worship? You can't. Right? So these are important matters. These are really important matters. I can say with confidence that this humble 1 hour discussion tonight is as important, more important than... Assalamu alaikum, come in. I'm just explaining to the guys, Kedem, about the importance of Hashr, right? We're discussing Hashr tonight, and you'll agree with me, won't you, that this humble 1 hour discussion tonight is as important as, for example, the highest level meetings at the United Nations. Would you agree? Even more important.
Absolutely.
Why? Because those matters generally look to this world only, whereas this discussion here, it looks to your eternal life. Okay, so I can say that without being egotistic. So now we're going to commence a preliminary read from the 10th word, but before I do that, I just want to cover a small matter, that of analogy. Okay, because we're going to start reading now a comparison, it amounts to an analogical argument, right? Ustad's going to prove something or things via a comparison, all right? Now, we encounter these kind of arguments quite often in the Risale Nur, but not always. He doesn't always prove matters through analogy. He uses various different kinds of logical proofs, but tonight's initial proof, at least, will be analogical, so it's important that we kind of mention this, right? Now, analogy, comparison, allegory, metaphor, all these kind of things, they're used in the Risale Nur either to aid your understanding of matters, right, to help you see something, right, or to prove something, or for both, okay? However, the use of analogical arguments has been criticised in the past, especially by the well-known philosopher Hume, on the basis of what I call the weakness of analogy. Okay, I don't know if that's the right terminology, but that's kind of how I understand it. There used to be a guy by the name of William Paley, and he made quite a famous argument for the existence of God, that being the watch or watchmaker analogy. Has anyone ever heard of that? So he said, look, if you kind of come across a watch in the woods, you would sort of definitely say that this watch has been made for a purpose. So therefore, when you look at the universe, you must also say that it's been made with a purpose. It sounds like a pretty cool argument to me. But this argument was criticised on the basis that a watch does not resemble the universe. A watch is nothing like the universe. The points of similarity between the watch and the universe are too few. So it was kind of criticised on that basis, and especially in Christian sort of theological thought, that kind of argument was kind of put to one side. They were sort of, it seems to me, they were sort of afraid to use that kind of argument from there on in. But Ustad quite confidently uses analogical arguments still. He doesn't rely on them only, right? Okay, I'm not saying that. There's a whole range of different kinds of arguments in the Risale Nur, but nonetheless, he still does use analogical arguments. So what's the story here? Okay, when Said Nursi uses analogical arguments, he always points out very strong points of similarity between the matters that are being compared. You know what I mean? So it seems as though he was cognizant of this kind of debate going on. Probably around about, I'm not sure when that debate took place, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was kind of around about the time that some of the Risales were being written. So I guess he was kind of cognizant of this debate happening in the background. And he sort of goes to lengths to explain why it is that his analogies are relevant, why it is that they can be used to prove things. For example, he insightfully compares the universe to a book, doesn't he? We all know this, right? He refers to the universe as the Kitab al-Kainat, the book of the universe. So in doing so, what he's doing is he's looking to not the external characteristics of a book and the universe, but rather to their inner aspects, right? So in this case, he shows how universal phenomena and books both exist to convey meaning. Isn't that true? If you've got like a little bit of insight, if you're an insightful person, you'll see that all things in the universe are there to convey meaning, right? And so is a book. So therefore, the analogy is perfect, isn't it? Now, if you can't see that the universe is there to convey meaning, well, I mean, that's your problem. That's your bad luck, because the reality is, because Ustad looks at matters from the reality. He's not concerned if you don't see the reality. The reality is this, and he's not afraid to speak of it, right? Because he knows that it's the reality. So that's just one example of how he does use analogy, but he uses it validly, right? He uses it validly. So I'm going through this tonight because no doubt some of us will encounter this criticism one day, in our readings. We will encounter people who will put this argument to us that no, analogical arguments have been, severely criticised by Hume in the past, and they're never valid. No, that's not true. It's not that they're never valid. They're invalid if the analogy is a weak one. If the analogy is extremely strong, it's perfectly valid to use, and it's perfectly valid to use them to prove matters. Okay, so let's keep this in mind when we read our comparison tonight, inshallah. So, just the last point on my slide here is that all the comparisons used in the Risale Nur can be demonstrated in the same way to be immune from Humean criticism. Why? Because they're strong analogies, not weak ones. Okay, we can prove that the points of similarity are numerous. Okay, between the things being compared. Okay. So I'm going to read now, if you're following at home, I'm going to read the start of the 10th word up to the first aspect. It's a bit of a precursor to the first two proofs that we're going to go through tonight. The 10th word, resurrection and the hereafter, Hashir and Ahirat. Okay, he opens up with a little note. The reasons for my writing these treatises in the form of metaphors, comparisons and stories are to facilitate comprehension and to show how rational, appropriate, well-founded and coherent are the truths of Islam. The meaning of the stories is contained in the truths that conclude them. Each story is like an allusion pointing to its concluding truth. Therefore, they are not mere fictitious tales, but veritable truths. Okay, and we have a verse from the Quran here, and I've only got the English translation, so I'll go with that. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate, the merciful. Look then to the signs of Allah's mercy, how He restores life to the earth after its death. Verily He it is who quickens the dead, for He is powerful over all things. Brother, if you wish for a discussion of resurrection and the hereafter in simple and common language, in a straightforward style, then listen to the following comparison together with my own soul. Once, two men were travelling through a land as beautiful as paradise. By that land, we mean the world. Looking around them, they saw that everyone had left open the door of his home and his shop and was not paying attention to guarding it. Money and property were readily accessible without anyone to claim them. One of the two travellers grasped hold of all that he fancied, stealing it and usurping it. Following his inclinations, he committed every kind of injustice and abomination. None of the people of that land moved to stop him. But his friend said to him, "What are you doing? You will be punished, and I will be dragged into misfortune along with you. All this property belongs to the state. The people of this land, including even the children, are all soldiers or government servants. It is because they are at present civilians that they are not interfering with you. But the laws here are strict. The king has installed telephones everywhere, and his agents are everywhere. Go quickly and try to settle the matter. But the empty-headed man said in his obstinacy, "No, it is not state property. It belongs instead to some endowment, and has no clear or obvious owner. Everyone can make use of it as he sees fit. I see no reason to deny myself the use of these fine things. I will not believe they belong to anyone unless I see him with my own eyes." He continued to speak in this way with much philosophical sophistry, and an earnest discussion took place between them. First, the empty-headed man said, "Who is the king here? I can't see him." Okay, this reminds me of the old logical positivists, right? I can't see God, right? So think of that. "Who is the king here? I can't see him." And then his friend replied, "Every village must have its headman. Every needle must have its manufacturer and craftsman. And as you know, every letter must be written by someone. How, then, can it be that so extremely well-ordered a kingdom should have no ruler? And how can so much wealth have no owner, when every hour a train arrives filled with precious and artful gifts, as if coming from the realm of the unseen?" And there's a footnote here. So the train that arrives every hour indicates the cycle of a year. Indeed, every spring is a carload of provisions coming from the realm of the unseen. And all the announcements and proclamations, all the seals and stamps found on all those goods, all the coins and the flags waving in every corner of the kingdom, can they be without an owner? It seems you have studied foreign languages a little and are unable to read this Islamic script. In addition, you refuse to ask those who are able to read it. Come now, let me read to you the king's supreme decree. The empty-headed man then retorted, "Well, let us suppose there is a king. What harm can he suffer from the minute use I am making of all his wealth? Will his treasury decrease on account of it? In any account, I can see nothing here resembling prison or punishment." His friend replied, "This land that you see is a manoeuvring ground. It is, in addition, an exhibition of his wonderful royal arts. Then again, it may be regarded as a temporary hospice, one devoid of foundations. Do you not see that every day one caravan arrives and another departs and vanishes? It is being constantly emptied and filled. Soon the whole land will be changed. Its inhabitants will depart for another and more lasting realm. There everyone will be either rewarded or punished in accordance with his services." That treacherous, empty-headed one retorted rebelliously, "I don't believe it. Is it at all possible that a whole land should perish and be transferred to another realm?" His faithful friend then replied, "Since you are so obstinate and rebellious, come, let me demonstrate to you with 12 out of innumerable proofs available that there is a supreme tribunal, a realm of reward and generosity, and a realm of punishment and incarceration, and that just as this world is partially emptied every day, so too a day shall come when it will be totally emptied and destroyed." Okay, so that's the end of the preliminary read. So I'm not going to go into, I'm not going to dissect that initial part, because the aspects, the proofs that are going to come now are going to do that for me. But know that the analogy here, okay, between, so where's the comparison, right? The comparison is between this little story of a kingdom somewhere, and the universe, and human civilization, I guess. Okay, so he's drawing the valid analogy, right? That this world and, you know, the human beings and the civilizations and societies within it exactly resemble a kingdom, right, or a land where there's a ruler. Okay, and he's going to sort of show how. So we'll continue now with the first aspect. Okay. So I've put this little bit up here now for everyone to read on the PowerPoint. It just says, is it at all possible that in any kingdom, and particularly so splendid a kingdom as this, there should be no reward for those who serve obediently, and no punishment for those who rebel? Reward and punishment are virtually non-existent here. There must therefore be a supreme tribunal somewhere else. Okay, so what do we think of that as a proof for the Hashir? You know, when I was thinking about this, I kind of thought, you know, and this point here sort of sums up what I was thinking. It does seem on the face of it, right, that proof there, it's kind of speaking only to, you know, that group of people that maybe concede that there could be a God, but say, okay, you know, like he referred to him in the comparison even. He said, okay, there might be a God. However, that doesn't mean that there has to be an afterlife. You know, there's no evidence of it. There's nothing to indicate that there has to be an afterlife. Sure, there might be a God, but how does that then prove the afterlife? So, on the face of it, this proof, it does answer that person by saying that, you know, look, if there is such a thing as a God, that necessitates the afterlife, right? And I'll explain how. But deeper than that, I would suggest that this proof can also answer the atheist, right? And I'll explain it via my note here, right? I've said here, on the face of it, this proof addresses those who concede that there could be a God, yet doubt the likelihood of the hereafter. But it can also be seen as proving God in the first place, by alluding to the fact that the universe is a kingdom, which must have a ruler, thereby addressing the atheist as well. Okay, and we're going to come back to this little point later, but for the time being, sorry, go.
I was going to say, there's actually a letter in Ressurection where someone criticized it, saying that the 10th word was only a proof if you had believed in God, to one of Ustad's students. And Ustad replies to him saying that's incorrect.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
So good. So I'm right.
We should definitely find that it does prove the hereafter without the need for belief for God in this chapter. So it does confirm that in this letter.
Yeah. I mean, it proves, to my mind, it proves both at once, because we do read elsewhere in the Risale Nur that belief in any one of the pillars of belief will necessitate belief in all the pillars of belief, right? If you understand those pillars of belief properly, you will see how they actually prove all the others, right? They're all sort of interlinked, you know. But anyway, we'll come back to that, right? But for the time being, right, consider this. Look at the work that people are doing here, right? You know, now, actually, before I even say that, right, if it's true that this universe is like the kingdom in the comparison, right, if that is really the case, now, how can it be that a kingdom not have a ruler? I mean, just by virtue of being called a kingdom, it obviously has a king who rules it, right? You know, how can we see that there is a kingdom in that little land in the comparison? You know, they looked around, they saw that everyone was acting in accordance or in obedience to the laws, right? Everyone was acting in an orderly fashion. There wasn't chaos, right? Everyone was happy to leave their doors open. You know, they weren't concerned about their property. Why? Because they knew that the king of that land was so powerful. You know, he had agents everywhere, telephones everywhere. I guess in the modern era, you can sort of think of it as, you know, there's cameras everywhere, right? There's cameras and there's, you know, people that'll ring up and dob you in all over the place. You know, there's hotlines and it's very hard to get away with breaking the law, isn't it? It's pretty hard, you know. Try speeding on the freeway nowadays. You know, like sometimes you're in a rush and you can't speed. There's fixed cameras, there's mobile cameras. So if somebody came here from another country and knew nothing about Australia, immediately they would notice from the way people were behaving. You know, at the red lights, people stop. Go to some other countries and that's not so much the case. Why? Because there aren't really, the traffic laws aren't policed. So its rulership is deficient. In Australia, it's not. You know, you go to a red light, any red light in Melbourne tonight, you'll see that people will stop there, right? Immediately you know that there must be a police force in this land, right? Which then proves that there must be a government, you know. There must be a polity, you know. There must be like rulership. You can't just do what you want, right? Now, isn't it true that this universe is exactly like that, right? Can we, I'll ask this, can you break any of the laws of physics? Can you? Can you travel faster than the speed of light? You can't. You cannot do anything. None of the subjects of this kingdom, no atom, none of the material, so the subjects of this universe are what? Matter, you know, material things. Whether it's atoms or people or stars, not one of them can act contrary to Allah's command. Now, so much is this so that scientists have said there are laws of the universe, haven't they? You know, there are laws of physics, laws of thermodynamics, laws of this and laws of that. You know, this universe is so orderly and so regulated that we have been, even the atheist accepts that there are laws. They'll just deny how the laws came to exist, right? So, when Ustad talks about it, this universe or this kingdom being orderly, right, as he does in this comparison, he's immediately proving that there has to be such a thing as a God, right? Because how can there be laws without a maker of, you know, a lawgiver, right? So, just give me a second. So, just by looking around you, right, you know, you can see that this universe is very much like the kingdom in the comparison. Right? Now, if it's true that this is a kingdom and there is a ruler, right, how can it be that there isn't another realm where we are rewarded for the things that we've done and punished for the things that we've done wrong? Why? Because isn't it true that although we live in a reasonably orderly country, a reasonably orderly world, people get away with serious crimes, right? Consider this, just on the news over the last couple of days, you've got a person who did a mass killing in Australia, Julian Knight. You know, I don't know how many people are killed, like heaps of people, like in the one go. Nine? 7 or 9, and injured probably many more. Now, this dude is due for release soon. You know, he's actually going to be eligible for release soon, and it's quite controversial. He was given a life sentence, but life in Australia means like 20 years or 25 years, you know. So another guy threw his child off the Westgate Bridge, okay, and what happened? He's been imprisoned for, I think, 30 years or something? Something like that, right? So can any person claim that justice has been done there? Nobody. No person, no rational person will say that that's sufficient recompense, right? Because what can I do to a person, right, a murderer, what can I do to a murderer to bring back the life that he took? Nothing, right? If I don't know, if I kill him, right, lethal injection or hang him, does that really right that wrong that he committed? It doesn't, right? So it's quite plain to see that insofar as wrongdoing is concerned, especially serious wrongdoing, there is no punishment for it, not proper punishment. Justice is very imperfect and limited here in this world. Yet, looking around the world, looking around the universe, we see that there's a ruler. There must be a ruler, because look how nothing breaks the laws of the universe other than free-willed human beings. We'll talk about that. Other than free-willed human beings, like one minuscule proportion of the entirety of the universe is able to, in some small way, break the laws. But everything else follows the laws perfectly. Thus, there must be a ruler. Yet, we see that not everyone's being punished properly here, right? People are still enjoying happy lives even though they've committed serious crimes, okay? So just that's saying that this necessitates the existence of another realm where that person is going to be held to account, okay? It has to be. Otherwise, then you may as well say there is no ruler. If he's not going to be punished elsewhere, it could only be because there is not a ruler. There is not a God, you know? Yet the universe points clearly to the fact that there has to be a God. Otherwise, why are there these laws? Why is it that none of these laws can ever be broken, you know? And I'll come back to you, Kenan, in just a second. On the other hand, you see that there's a lot of good that's done as well. Like, think, for example, of, the example I've got up there, right, is an ambulance driver, a humble ambulance driver. You know, he gets paid, 75 grand a year. You know, it's not bad money, but really, look at what he does, you know. Look at the difficulty he goes through. You know, he deals with drug overdoses, he deals with heart attacks, he deals with blood and gore. He saves lives, right? What amount of money can compensate him? You know, what is a life worth, right? You know what I mean? Like, would you give up your health for any amount of money, right? Would you say, yes, give me AIDS or cancer for, I don't know, $1 billion? Would anyone say that? Nobody would say this, right? Nobody would say this, unless it was for some altruistic reason, in terms of, you know, I'll give the money to my family. But in terms of for yourself, right, you would not give your health or your life for any amount of money, you know. So therefore, people in those kind of professions, you can see that their pay does not compensate them, you know. That's just one example. A doctor. Think of even like a teacher, right? They give the gift of education, learning, right? This is invaluable, right? You know, the gaining of wisdom, the learning of things, you know. You need this knowledge to survive in the world, right? You can't really put a price on it. And teachers, especially in Australia, are regularly upset that, you know, they're not compensated properly. Kenan, you've nearly finished your masters in education. Have you finished it or almost? Nearly.
Just for some wage increase.
Yeah, good. You know what I mean? But like, isn't it true, right? That our finest academics, our finest thinkers, all see the value of education. In fact, you know, there are university faculties dedicated to improving how we educate people. Yet teachers are compensated fairly poorly, you know. So now this example can be carried on with anyone that does anything pretty much, right? You know, the work that we do is valuable, yet the recompense that we receive in most cases is not sufficient for it, you know. Now think of worship, right? Because look, the majority of people have always believed in a God and have always worshipped that God. Go back throughout civilization, you know, atheists have always been in the minority, especially today. I mean, they're very much in the minority. A vocal minority, but a minority nonetheless. Now, most people have always worshipped. You know, for the Muslim, for the believer in Allah, everything that he does is worship. Even his sleep can be worship, right? Yet what recompense does he see for it here in this life, you know? Like, you pray 5 times a day, right? You know, not you pray 5 times a day. Do you get any money for it? Well, what do you get? You know, apart from, you know, a lightness of spirit and a kind of a happiness, you know, like an internal happiness, maybe not even an external happiness. Sometimes it's difficult to pray, you know. It's sometimes burdensome, you know. Like fasting, it's extremely difficult, you know, especially if, you know, you're a breastfeeding mother or a pregnant woman, you know. Like my wife fasted, you know, some of last Ramadan, although she was pregnant, you know. It's extremely difficult, right? Yet people have always done this. You know, for thousands of years, people have worshipped God. Yet what recompense do they see there and then? Not much, right? Yet we've just proven there has to be such a thing as a God, a ruler, as, you know, the order and the laws of the universe clearly point to. Now, is it at all possible, okay, that such a ruler would leave the good work of all his subjects unrewarded and the bad deeds of his subjects unpunished? Okay? That's not reasonable, right? Thus it necessitates the afterlife, and that's what this first aspect is talking about, okay? So I'll just continue with my PowerPoint here. So I've got here, the first aspect highlights that the fact that while we perform much valuable work here, our recompense for it is little. Consider the pay earned by a paramedic compared to the value of saving a life, for example. Or consider ritual worship, as we've just discussed. Right? It's clear that the real reward for these duties is deferred. Conversely, consider the punishment meted out to criminals. Is a life sentence sufficient justice for murder? Is even the death penalty sufficient to right the wrong of killing? What about those who get away with serious crimes, who aren't punished at all? Clearly, if Allah exists, and we can prove that He does, the hereafter must also exist so that real justice can be done. That's the end of the first aspect, and it's almost 8, so I think I'm going to leave the second aspect for another time because it's even longer than the first one. So let's use this 5 minutes to kind of discuss what we've gone through. Are there any questions or comments that anyone can make?
Did he talk? Because I haven't read it recently, but did he talk about wealth there in the sense of, in spring, have a look at the wealth and the valuable products that the universe produces as a part of the fact that it is a kingdom. It does have an owner. Because if you look at anything valuable, it generally has an owner, right? Or it has someone who's taken ownership of it.
I do believe that is one of the latter aspects. I'm pretty sure because that's familiar to me. Definitely.
And the recordings that he was talking about, that he talked about the laws, but there's always recording here from the fact, again, it could be the other aspects, but from seeds, from our DNA,
yes.
Wherever you look in this universe, you see things being recorded. In our memory, that's another one he uses. That we are recording things that we don't even require. Our natural ability does that.
That's true. And that is so. What you've mentioned is alluded to in the comparison, and it is discussed in latter aspects. But you're right. You're absolutely right, and it's worth pointing out even now. That I've discussed how. I've discussed one indication to the fact that one proof for the fact that this world, this universe, must have a ruler. Throughout that story that we read at the start, there are allusions to various other things, like you've mentioned, and they are again discussed at length. I think in the other aspects, but and then later in the 10th word, he actually speaks about the proofs for the Hashir without referring to any allegory or any comparison. So he kind of attacks it more directly. In the first instance, he sort of speaks of it from the perspective of a comparison. But this is merely as a prelude to what's to come. And now this will take weeks and weeks to go through, as you know. We're kind of studying the 10th word in another discussion group that we're attending on Monday nights as well. So I'm kind of relying on some of the things that I've learnt there to pass on tonight. Yeah.
In terms of the first aspect,
I'll go back to it if you want. Yeah.
The notions of reward and punishment, it's unique in that if you analyse the conditions in which reward and punishment is given, it's not possible for it to come from disorder or anarchy or chaos. If there's reward and if there's punishment, take the university, take the Order of Australia, Queen's Medal, military medal, always comes for punishment. So like you said, crime, where you're in prison for committing a particular act, or I don't know, Guantanamo Bay, take whatever you want. Where there is reward, where there is punishment, points to order,
Immediately,
points to a system, points to authority. In which case, the first aspect is short, but it's succinct to point that if there is order, which we see, the kingdom as it mentioned, then the fact that we don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist in terms of the reward and punishment.
Yeah.
The reward and punishment will be dealt with
Mhm.
but it's deferred, as you mentioned as well.
Yeah.
It's just purely deferred.
Yeah.
It's so clear, so evident that, as evident as we see the order,
Yeah.
as evident as we see objects in this world, that reward and punishment will be dealt with.
Yes.
So it's unique because no one can deny reward and punishment. We all feel it, we all get it from our parents, from, to our children, we deal with it with our children, studies, social life, justice. Every aspect has a reward and punishment.
Yep.
And I think it's very unique in that sense.
Yeah.
If you reverse the logic that way, I
Yeah.
think it opens up.
Yeah, no, that's true as well. Like, I mean, how I kind of think of it as well is like this. I mean, in any country or state where there is order, right? And of course, there is only order when there's government and the laws, the police, right? But in any orderly country like Australia, right, it's quite reasonable to expect that you will be compensated at least to some extent for the work that you do, right? Like think for example of a country where there isn't much order. Some of the developing countries or some of the war-torn countries. You might work for the government there, but the government itself is only just surviving, right? So there's no guarantee that you're going to get your pay. There isn't any guarantee. Whereas in Australia, there's a very strong system of order, right? The government is strong, the police force is strong, the army is strong. If you work for the government, you're going to get paid every fortnight. You don't even have to think about it. Every fortnight, just look in your bank account and you'll see the pay there, right? So you're right, like wherever you see that you are being, you're receiving a recompense, or wherever you see a place where you do something wrong and you're punished for it, although as we've said that, the punishment might not be perfect, but nonetheless, you are held to account to some extent. It immediately points to an order, doesn't it? Because and vice versa, if there is an order in place, again, there will be reward and punishment. So we see a universal order, Allah's order, Allah's grip on this universe is just awesome. It's just perfect, right? Nothing can act contrary to Allah's laws, right? Now, don't get confused by humans and their use of free will, right? We have got free will, as we've discussed previously. We've got free will, Allah has given that free will, and He has said, I will allow you to choose the wrong thing if you want, But then it is not us who then actuates that bad choice. Allah enables it, So we think that we're acting contrary to the Sharia, for example, right? But actually, we can only transgress to the extent that Allah has allowed in the first place, The only transgression that we're really doing is the misuse of our free will, Apart from that, even the worst sinner, he is forced to obey all the laws of the universe, right? Even if you break some of the laws of the, narrower Sharia, but the wider Sharia, the universal Sharia, what we call the laws of physics, nobody can break these. There's just a perfect order, right? We've discussed the fine-tuning of the universe in previous discussions. Scientists have kind of understood recently that the universe is just perfectly ordered, perfectly fine-tuned. Look at your DNA. Look at your DNA. Like if your DNA is harmed, like if the code of your DNA is disrupted in any way through radiation or something, like is happening in Japan, you'll die. You'll get cancer and die. So there is a perfect order, right? And if you try to mess with it, it'll spell your death. Try to go faster than the speed of light. Nothing in the universe can go faster than that speed limit that Allah has set. So it points to Allah's existence, and if Allah exists, it's impossible that He would allow transgression not to be addressed, nor would He allow your good work to go unrewarded. Right? So that's the proof. So.
Just touch on Kerem's point there as well, is that whenever we see in any country the removal of reward or punishment, that law and order is instantly broken.
Yeah.
That we have
True.
chaos, we have a state of, I guess, war,
Mm-hmm.
a civil war in a country. So the fact that there is order there is automatically showing that there is reward and punishment.
Yeah.
Because when we look at it in practical sense, that soon as a government cannot, put their rewards and punishments into place, might be just a small land, that chaos is caused instantly.
Yeah.
That there is civil war that we've seen in the past. So that's a really good point that he's definitely touched upon.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Obviously, like we're speaking here, aren't we, about adalet, right? Justice.
Yeah.
When we talk about the laws of the universe, right? Really, as Brother Colin Turnaby has rightly pointed out to me, there's just this. When we talk about justice, it doesn't just refer to the righting of wrongs and things like that. It does refer also to just balance and doing things in the right measure and the right proportion and things like that. Well, I mean, the universe is the most perfect example of this, right? There's just a perfect justice in the universe, right down to how many atoms there are and how many photons of light there are. Everything is perfectly balanced, as it needs to be. As scientists have discovered, if it was any different, the universe couldn't sustain life. This is fairly uncontroversial in science today. So definitely there's like an all-encompassing justice, right? If this God that is the ruler of this land, of this universe, is that just, his justice is on a universal scale, how is he going to allow people to go without proper punishment? A guy throws his child off the Westgate Bridge and gets out of jail in 20, 30 years to sort of enjoy his twilight years. You know what I mean? Like, how is that compatible with that all-encompassing justice that we see? We see that he's not punished properly in this life. Therefore, since this God is so just, there has to be an afterlife. And that's how he starts proving it here. I think we'll finish there if there aren't any questions online or anything. Okay, so if there aren't any questions from our online viewers, we'll end there and hopefully catch you next week. Assalamu alaikum.
Make sure we save it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,